And we're live with our 277th episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on social media, joined by my co-host Seth Law at Seth Law on social media. Seth, say hi.
Howdy, everyone. Welcome back to another episode. We're excited today to have Kyle Rippee with us. We're going to get into introductions with him shortly. We're going to talk about security engineering and executive support and all sorts of other things. We'll see where the conversation goes from there. Before we dig into it, though, I did want to bring up a couple of items. First of all, we just did our Harnessing LLMs for Application Security course, and it was super fun. That course is evolving very quickly. That's what we're learning. Just like the AI space, there's so much there that we can actually automate and do with LLMs. Excited to have that one again. Watch the training.absoluteappsec.com site for more opportunities with harnessing LLMs. And we have also announced, I'm happy to talk about Practical Secure Code Review, the AI enhanced version. We will be doing a virtual course on March 27th and 28th. This course is already selling quickly, so if you would like a spot, now is the time to register. We haven't taught Practical Secure Code Review since I want to say October or November, right, Ken? From a virtual perspective or from any perspective. There is an opportunity there as well with DEF CON in June, I think is the next one. But outside of that, this will be it, I think, for the spring. Outside of the virtual courses, there may be another one that picks up. So we've had quite a few questions about this course. We've had quite a few people reach out. Now is the time to jump on it. And if that time does not work for you, please reach out, right? There's also private trainings. There's some other things that we can do. Training.absoluteappsec.com is where you can find all the information on both those courses, and that's where you should watch for upcoming opportunities. Now, besides that, I did want to give a shout out to Dry Run Security today for being our sponsor. Authorization flaws are some of the trickiest security gaps. Permissions get messy, logic gets overlooked, and suddenly users have access they shouldn't. Dry Run Security helps you catch these risks early with natural language code policy. Our latest white paper dives deep into real-world authorization failures and how Dry Run Security finds them before they get shipped to production. Grab your copy now at dryrun.security/auth-flaws. So go to Dry Run Security for more information there. Thanks to Dry Run. And yeah, I think the only other announcement that we have is that we did get a panel accepted for B-Side San Francisco. We're going to be there running a panel with a number of different guests, including Ariel Shin, who's been on the podcast. Jivan Singh was going to be on the panel, but it sounds like he's got a conflict. So we're going to add some others to the panel. Lakshmi from Netflix as well, besides Ken and me. And yeah, it's going to be a good time. It'll be the state of Absolute AppSec, but the state of AppSec, we're going to go dive into all the things. Yeah, anything else I'm missing, Ken, from an announcement perspective that you'd like to bring up before we?
Yeah, we'll probably put out a document to get people's questions for things they want included in the state of Absolute AppSec. It's just the only other thing I was going to add onto this.
Yes. We'll put something out, especially on Slack, to get some information. Like we have very specific topics that we proposed, which is exactly what you would expect, like generative AI and AppSec, like what do you expect from AppSec or ProdSec in the next year? What's going well? What's not? Like those kind of generic topics are always of general interest. But if you have very specific topics or questions that you'd like the panelists to answer, we'll put that out there. Cool. Well, good. We'd like to welcome Kyle to the show. We're going to dig into his background to start. We've known Kyle for a number of years. Excited to have him here. I know he's been at a number of different organizations helping run, security engineering and product security. Been a tester in the past. But yeah, by way of introduction, Kyle, currently you're at Tynes. Go ahead and say hello.
Yeah. Hey, nice to meet everybody. I'm Kyle Rippee. So I guess I'll do a little intro of myself real quick and give a little origin story. So I started off in cybersecurity quite a long time ago, and probably around 2008, so early 2000s roughly. Started getting into cybersecurity, and I always kind of knew I was interested in cybersecurity and specifically application security. I was a hobbyist at a very young age, playing around with hardware components, swapping out RAM in my computer to get the most out of it, and then building websites for my mother's coworkers and things like that. I had a little GeoCities set up where I had, those old school flyers where you had the rip off notes. You cut the little note, you rip off the little tag, and have the number or whatever. And my mom's coworkers would call me up and arrange different websites and things of that nature. So that was fun. So moving into my cybersecurity career, I started off as kind of a jack of all trades in DoD contracting, DoD DOJ contracting in Northern Virginia area. And I quickly realized that my passions were really in code and application security, and focused on that. So I swapped I went to BAE Systems to get some engineering experience and just some development experience working um, on the fly or at an organization doing code development. And then I swapped over from there. I had the opportunity to jump into pen test consulting at the time. It was right in that time period where like the public sector was still really big in security, but private sector was starting to get more security and more interested. So hopped over into pen test consulting, and I was working for organizations like Fishnet, GuidePoint, and things of that nature. I was actually one
Mhm.
of GuidePoint's one of the first employees at GuidePoint, and helped define that application pen testing policy and that procedure there, and their reporting and templates as well way back then. And then I've done quite a bit in between. I worked for a company called Atos that was also did some large scale consulting work around IT and security. Kind of the biggest thing there was probably working on the Winter Olympics, the 2018 Winter
Oh,
Olympics,
nice.
helping secure the architecture around that, and making sure that everything went off without a hitch. So that was a lot of fun. Went out to Madrid for that and met with the Olympics team, and they were great guys. Then I've moved over since then into more of the blue team side of the house. It started off at Shutterfly, and I was working at Shutterfly and securing their application infrastructure and their application security there, kind of building out the program or helping mature that program a bit more. And then I moved over to a fintech startup called FloQast. And at FloQast, I was there for a bit, also working on their application security. I worked very heavily with the platform team designing secure packages and libraries and things of that nature for our developers to use, and secure methods to create templated GitHub repos with the correct environmental credentials and secrets all set up ahead of time. So we were good there. And then I moved over to PlanetArt, where I was building out their AppSec team as well, and build out the pretty much the entire application security program from start to finish over at PlanetArt. And then I eventually took over the team as director of InfoSec, and I was leading that team. And I got recently had a great opportunity to come to Tynes, and I
Mhm.
swapped over to Tynes. And now I've been here working on really exciting work, solving very interesting problems. Not having to deal with a whole bunch of tech debt is nice. Not having to deal with a whole bunch of vulnerability debt as well is really nice. Being able to focus on like the critical issues that are actual problems, rather than solving a patch or a dependency issue or some basic SQL injection or something of that nature. So it's really good.
Yeah.
The
Yeah,
engineering
that's
team can
it.
have all the difference, the team and the culture.
Yep.
Hmm.
Yeah, it definitely can, right? So it seems like you've seen quite a bit, right? Like especially from the defense side of things. And this is always interesting to me, and I think the community in general, right? Is like we all have our pathways. I know on my side, I've ended up doing more kind of like third party work, right, as
Hmm.
opposed to individual contributor work. And so my question to you is, right, like where you've seen all of these different environments, right? What is it that you feel like is effective from your perspective as like an individual contributor in building out an application security program? I know it's a very generic question, but just in general, like what has been helpful to you in building those out and being successful?
Yeah, I would say there's a lot that we as security professionals or AppSec professionals can do on our end that can help that. But if I really looked at it from, you know, outside looking in, the truth of the matter is that the real key factor is culture and buy-in from leadership and from the organization to get the developers to understand that security is a legitimate concern and not just something to be addressed after the fact, something that, because I've been in a lot of environments, and speaking on that, over the years, and differing environments. Like I said, I went to pen test consulting and then the blue team side of the house, and the pretty consistent thing that I've seen across different organizations that I've either worked for or consulted for really boils down to their success is really dependent on adapting or integrating true security into the entirety of their organization, and not just trying to slap it on a band-aid. Yeah, I guess, like I said, we can do a lot in that regard, but it really does boil down to culture, I think.
Mhm. Well, yeah, and this is one of the things that you need to consider as you're looking at as an organization. Like you're,
Yeah.
I mean, I think in general, when I talk to people new to the space, they're always just going to take the first thing that comes along, right? Like
Hmm.
they consider the money, the position, the name of the company, whatever it is, right off the bat, and that works, but it does feel rather naive at times if
Yeah.
you're not actually interviewing the company at the same time to see what sort of support they're going to give to the security team or the security process. Um, yeah, like because we've seen that be unsuccessful in multiple locations, right? Like I mean, I used to give Ken a whole bunch of crap about being at like the product security, Valhalla at GitHub, and it was for a time because of how they treated security in general, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's faded a little bit with the Microsoft takeover. It doesn't mean that they're not taking security seriously anymore, but it's not quite the same as it was, when Ken first went over there, right?
Yeah, we had a lot of time, and as you add more people to the mix, obviously, and not more people on the. I mean, there were more people added on the security team, but proportionally, yeah, obviously the engineers got the bulk. So it's still good. It's just the work got, it was like when you have 3 or 4 weeks to review like some simple app that's being designed from scratch, you're like, all right, yeah, you guys, you've done a lot of, I mean, both of you have done so much consulting that like that's what do you get really normally? You don't get like 4 weeks or whatever you need, right? You get
Yeah.
you get days or a week or 2 weeks if you're lucky.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, you
yeah,
can hire the best security engineers and the best people, and you can and let them do their job all day. But if there's not buy-in from the rest of the organization to integrate those projects or those ideas, or to actually do the things that those people are working on, then it can really, it can slow things down, and it can cause some angst amongst those engineers and those people that are trying to contribute to the company and trying to do what's right. And when they're constantly told, like, hey, we can't move forward because this, that, or the other reason, without really a way to get around it or to try and come up with a compromise, and it's just kind of get stonewalled, then it's not great for a lot of people, I think.
Well, and I apologize because like this is gonna make you think. But really, this question's to both you guys. Like, well, I say it's gonna make you think because it's gonna make you think on the fly. But red flags, right? Like I'm saying this because Kyle spent a ton of time doing defense. Even though you've done a lot of consulting too, you've done quite a bit of managing programs and building programs and securing companies. And I know, Seth, you've done the same, man, from both defensive and offensive perspectives. So, if you're like going to work with an organization or work for an organization, are there any red flags that sort of, as you're either going through the interview process or maybe even just during that conversations with other people who already work there, or like maybe it's just like you're still within that 90-day window where it's kind of, you and the company can both say, okay, this didn't really work out. And it's not for either of us or whatever it is. Are there anything that really, or are there things that stick out to the two of you there that
I
are
would
like
say
warning
the
signs?
latter for sure. I would say the latter for sure. It's like it's It's hard for me, at least. I mean, maybe somebody else has some really good tips that they want to share, but for me, at least, it's always been hard to get a good judge of that during the interview process. You can get a decent idea, but it's mostly a gut check, I think. It really boils down to, in my experience, like once you get in there, once you start understanding the architecture, or like talking to some individuals and seeing how people take to security recommendations and things of that nature, it really starts telling you what you need to know.
Mhm. Yeah, from my perspective, right, like coming in as a third party, it's always very telling when we're doing scoping or right, like talking about the projects that a company wants to have us do. Just asking the question, why are we looking at this code, right? Like,
Yeah.
or why are we doing this? Because that'll tell us first off, right? Like, oh, is this a simple compliance check, right? Like, is the only reason
Yeah.
that the company wants to look at this because they, they have to meet their SOC 2 Type 2 certification, or PCI or whatever it is, right? Like, that is super telling to me. Number one, from a okay, like I know how much that I'm going to have to bid out because this is a race to the bottom type thing, or hey, look, they're taking security seriously. It looks like, the typical answer that I want to see is like, oh, well, we're doing this for compliance, but we want real results out of it, right? Like,
Yeah.
we're going to give you a little bit of extra time. We're going to give you added access to the developers or whatever it is in order to actually answer those questions, so we get real security issues solved for that. So that's one of the things that I look at when I'm embedded in an organization. To Kyle's point, this usually takes a little bit longer, right? It's not always apparent right off the bat,
Yeah.
but the way that they treat the way that they treat reported vulnerabilities and how those actually get solved, where they actually end up, is pretty telling to me.
Yes.
So like an organization where engineering takes those vulnerabilities, they get put into Jira, they get put into the backlog, they get worked as regular bugs as opposed to security bugs, shows to me that there is like engineering and security support for solving security bugs, right, and security issues. When it's, hey, it gets put in a separate Jira board that is only for security, and you go look at that board and they have things from 2 years ago that no one's ever commented on, right? Even though it was reported by the last set of pen testers or whatever that were in there. I'm like, oh, this is how this is going, right? Like, only very few things actually get picked up. So yeah. Anyway, those are red flags for me, right? Yeah, that I'm looking
Yep.
at. Yeah.
Maybe
I don't know
another
if you,
question you could ask
agree.
is, how many things
Yeah.
did you fix since the last report? That's probably another place you could start. How many things did you resolve from your last vulnerability assessment?
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a hard one, right? Like,
Don't
you
get me
have to
wrong,
kind
there
of.
are some really good red flags that you can get during the interview process. Like asking questions like, okay, well, how would you prefer I engage with the engineering team? Like, let's say you're a
Mhm.
security researcher coming in, an AppSec person. If your manager says, oh yeah, we can set up I can try and set up a meeting for a monthly, or we can try and arrange something, but they're all really busy. That might be an issue, because as an engineer, you're probably going to need some more direct, or a security engineer, you're probably going to need some more direct access to those engineering leaders and things of that nature. If your boss says during the interview, or your potential hiring manager says, yeah, I mean, well, get onboarded and go ahead and set up arrangements with different teams, and go ahead and Slack them, get some meetings scheduled. You can go ahead and schedule a bi-weekly with them, or a weekly or whatever, and do your own thing. Then that's a different story. That means I know that right off the bat, I have some guidance or some investment from leadership to be able to help push things along, to try and some freedom to be able to engage with these engineers and make some decisions, and yeah, this gives you some ideas, gives you an idea of the ability to have a bit more anonymity, what word am I looking for?
Autonomy,
Anonymity.
autonomy, I think, is maybe what you mean.
Maybe, yeah, probably autonomy. Yeah, that's probably the word I was looking for. My brain today. Sorry about that, guys.
Well, it is early for where you're at. You're
Somewhat.
behind. Yeah, to me, it's still fairly early where you're at. Well, I mean, and I was going to ask, like, have you had situations where, like, either of you guys had a situation where somebody, was like, hey, maybe don't go talk to engineers, maybe like let me be the intermediary, and not for like a good reason, like there's some specifically sketchy situation, just generally like they're like, no, we don't do that. Have you all experienced that before?
One time, and I kind of shot it down and did not agree with that. But yeah.
One time, well, yeah, I want to say only one time, but actually it happens more than, yeah, especially as a third party, right? Like, which I can understand, right? Like, but usually when I'm embedded in an organization, right? Like, I've seen it, I've seen the pushback more from like like the product management teams, right? Like the product teams that are in charge of delivering for customers, pushing back on security, where they don't want security dictating what the engineers are doing, right? And so whenever an engineer tells me, oh, well, that's great, I want to go fix it, but I can't get the time to do it, that's a huge red flag, right? And that's not something I'm gonna get out of an interview typically, right?
Yeah.
Which is difficult. It's hard to judge that in the interview format. But within that 90 days, if an engineer ever tells you, well, I just can't get time to work on security stuff, yeah, that's showing a higher level of immaturity from the organization, right?
Yeah, right. If you've got
Exactly.
some actual issues that you can't get resolved, yeah, they're too busy or just not given the time and the space to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm curious, Kyle, when you have you like I know you've worked and built out programs, and so like one question is, if you're and I know this question is also, or the answer to this question is totally dependent on the type of organization. But when you come into a place, and let's say it's been pretty early on in terms of security, maybe they focus more on like network engineering or whatever, and like because I definitely know you've come into like places where software security is kind of just now becoming a thing that they're trying to focus on. What are the sort of the approaches that you bring to the table when you first come in? To get your bearings, to get sort of something kicked off. Yeah, just what's it like basically trying to go in from 0 to 1 and not having an established AppSec program?
Yeah, I would say it depends obviously on your level of competency or the way how comfortable you feel with some of the technical aspects. But if you're comfortable with source code review, one of my recommendations is to try and get in and open up the source code and start reviewing some source, trying to understand how the application flow works, where there might be some potentially risky handling of sensitive information, or how different things are just how things flow within your application, how the authentication flow works, if there is, how the forgot password functions or work, if when you're signed out it actually forces the a browser connection to close, or closes the session out and prevents session fixation. There's getting a basic understanding of just the general security of your application to start, from a source code review is a really good approach. If you're not confident with that, I would use something like Cursor or Windsurf. Load up your application into like Cursor or Windsurf and ask a few questions of your indexed code base, from the chatbot. Try to get a better understanding. From there, once you've got like a basic understanding, so you kind of know at least the questions to ask, right? I always try and start getting meetings arranged with engineering leaders, different product leaders or project managers, even having conversations, principal engineers or staff engineers as well. Great resources for information, or great sources of information when you're coming into a company if they've been there for a bit, and just kind of pick their brain about what they think are some of the biggest security issues. If they are aware of any potential flaw or flows that might be concerning to them, or anything that they want you to look at, and get an idea of their understanding of the application as well, and how they think it should be used, and things of that. Because getting differing opinions and differing ideas, you don't want to make imperialistic decisions, and just kind of like you want to make sure that you're getting all the information possible in that regard. After that, personally, I focus primarily on code, from the start. Especially if I'm looking at it from the ground up, my first goal is probably to either build out or invest in a good SAST tool or something to assist in identifying potential security flaws for an AppSec engineer to potentially do some additional investigation and then come up with a recommendation to talk with the developers about and get some PRs in. It's very easy nowadays to get some pretty simplistic SCA components in place for just dependency security, and dependency security is a big deal. I mean, you can have quite a few vulnerabilities that you don't even realize if you're not paying attention to that, and you're not paying attention to your SBOMs or your supply chain as well. Can be a big issue. I was just digging into a whole bunch of potential supply chain issues yesterday, and had to do a whole bunch of diving into SBOMs. So that's always fun work. Um, but yeah, I would focus mostly on the code. Personally, nowadays, especially with single page applications, I steer away from most automated dynamic testing. Like most DAS, I prefer more like bug bounties and things of that nature to get independent researcher information. And then just manual pen testing internally and externally are both also, really good options just to get an understanding of the footprint and kind of where you're currently at and where you need to move to. So
Yeah, and at what point do you feel, because that's something that comes up quite a bit too regarding bug bounties, because what you said there was interesting, well, I guess it's really two questions that drop out of this one. Is like, one, why I think I know the answer. I think, I'm sure Seth, I'm sure you know the answer, but why bug bounty over DAST style tooling? And then I have a follow-up question, which is about like when to bring in the bug bounty program into it. But just starting with the first one, why bug bounty versus DAST tooling?
I mean, the simple answer is that I feel like Dast it's struggling right now for quite a few reasons, but the simplest reason is probably single page applications. It kind of makes Dast problematic in a lot of ways to really try and get through an actual scan of an application. The configuration time can be frustrating. Maintaining that configuration can be frustrating. Maintaining credentials and proper flows that you want to be tested and keeping those up to date, especially if you have a frequent development cycle or active developers that are contributing code and making changes at a rapid pace. It can be quite challenging for a security team to keep up with that from an automated perspective. The results that you find are often low hanging fruit, very surface level. They don't you I don't remember the last time, if ever, that I've seen a DAST give me a potentially good logic flaw or something with an application that is potentially a pivoted exploit or something of that nature. And that is something that is just strictly missing when you get a bug bounty when you have a bug bounty program and you've got independent researchers who are invested in this, and they are invested in getting paid at the end of the day. They're putting forward their best foot and their best effort to try and provide detailed explanations of a report. Hopefully, that's why they're looking to pay these people, and you can get a lot more granularity and understanding of the vulnerability rather than just, hey, we pulled this banner and we noticed you had a vulnerable version. So
Yeah, and to be clear, you're not talking about somebody. It doesn't sound like you're talking about somebody who's like running burp and doing manual analysis. You're talking about straight up, just pointing, giving credentials, setting the login flow, kind of autonomous style DAS tool.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And to your point, right? Like, when we all worked at Fishnet and GuidePoint, DAST was the starting point, right, for a lot of what we did. Web Inspect, AppScan ruled the day, but I still remember like pulling my hair out trying to get it to work with anything that would use like jQuery, like the early SPAs, like the single page applications, because it just didn't understand what was going on, which is where we shifted more heavily to using burp and the scanners that were more targeted scans. But I still see quite a few organizations that use DAST because it was recommended for so long, right? Whether that is NetSparker and Web Inspect, like some of the, whatever AppScan, like those sorts of tools. And then but then they also they try to pair it with SAST. They try to pair it with other things to make it more useful. But I'm with you. I don't think I've seen real results come out of some of those for a number of years.
I'm
On the
not saying
flip,
you shouldn't use a DAST.
yeah,
If you find if your environment and redundancy is good, having a DAST if you can justify it in your program is really great. But when I'm looking at it from my experience, at least in the past few years, I just don't see much value in comparison. Like I'm looking at my bug bounty program a lot more often than I'm looking at my DAST dashboard, I guess is the best way to put it.
yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, it's the value of you that you get out of it, right? Like, I have a hard time
Yep.
justifying the cost that goes into some of those tools when, hey, I get, especially with the project discovery stuff that's come out in the last few years, right? Like nuclei scans, I get the same sort of value out of a nuclei scan as I did out of NetSpark or AppScan back in the day, because it's mostly that low hanging fruit, and that paired with Burp Suite, and I'm good to go, right? And I'm not necessarily talking even about like the Burp Suite, Enterprise Edition, because I have my own set of issues like with that as well, even though it may perform a little bit better. And then you talk about some of those tools that are coming out of the bug bounty space, right? Where it is what is it, like Asset Note and some of those others. They're DAS style tools, but they're very specific on I'm looking for X, Y, and Z, right? Like we know we've had issues with cross-site scripting in these specific frameworks in this specific way. And if they identify it, they've got a better false positive ratio than some of the legacy tools that are out there. But those have come out of the bug bounty space, and so like you've got to balance it out, I think, is what you're trying to say, and what I would agree with.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say
yeah.
I would say that in a large capacity, this is kind of a trend across the entire security industry from what I've seen. And not just AppSec, when it comes to like automated testing and things of that nature, signature-based testing is kind of dying, in my opinion. And there's so many different ways that things can mutate, I guess, or change in an environment nowadays, and people are taking advantage of that. That signature-based is not always great. It's not working very well. I've seen some really good examples of that. There was actually a research paper where some students were doing some like basically comparing ransomware attacks and modern day malware and ransomware attacks to RNA and DNA, and trying to look at identifying malware more like RNA or DNA that can potentially shift and change over time rather than based off of a signature.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've always, it's always been deficient when you think about it. It was just like the best thing that we had at the time, and it worked okay. But this does go back to a point that Ken's been bringing up quite a bit lately is how are we okay with tools that produce only 30 to 40% not false positives, but real results, right? Like if 60% of what you're getting out of a tool is a false positive, how are we okay with that? And I don't get it, because it's like we filter it out, and we've become resigned to the fact that that's how good the tools are. I think that's maybe what it is.
I've heard of some shops not even doing SAST or SCA. I don't know what else they're doing. I'm sure that there's got to be other security controls, but I've heard of shops that have gotten rid of DAST, SAST, SCA, RASP, any of that tooling altogether. And I do think they're focusing more on safe sort of guardrails and relationships with developers and all those other things that we've heard a lot of, over the last like 7-8 years. But I don't know that I would be confident just eliminating all tooling, like even just simple stuff like Rahul at GitHub had wrote this thing called, I think it was like Red Run or something, a red whatever. It looked for dangling subdomains, because subdomain takeovers was like an annoying thing that happened. Excuse me, sorry, sneezed live on air. Yeah, I don't know if I've ever sneezed live on air, but there we are, first for everything. In any case, so even a tool like that was immensely valuable for like cutting down bug bounty submissions and just kind of keeping us somewhat safe from domain takeover, subdomain takeover type deal. So it's like I don't know that even that script is really really helpful, let alone something that's So I don't know. I don't know what say your feeling or your Kyle or your feeling Seth would be on something like that, but that is a trend that I'm hearing more and more about, which is surprising.
Yeah. I remember having this discussion way back in the day when I was working at one of the financial places, right? Is we kind of came up with this idea that false negatives so false positives are actually way worse than false negatives to put in front of developers. So like, and this was back when we were trying to roll out like Fortify, for example, right? Whatever, whoever owns it nowadays, right? Like SaaS tool, scanning code, that we were very targeted on, hey, we know that Fortify does well identifying this. That's the only result that we're actually going to push to developers because we can't trust the rest of it. And all we do is ruin the trust that developers have with the security team if we give them false positives. Yep. Whereas if a false negative is in there and we didn't detect something, hey, we're going to depend on other things to catch that. But we're not, it's not worth the damage in our relationship to give them too much that isn't going to be actionable. So,
yeah, exactly. Like it's not going to be actionable, and
yeah.
I'm reading what Robert said about SCA is valuable for more than just positive findings. I found it useful for assessing developer patterns, systemic risky behaviors, and high density area findings. All that's true, and I'd add that like it tells you more about the technology stack, how to make sort of a risk assessment on where you want to focus your attention on the application. If like it's using SSO related libraries, that there's a whole slew of OAuth related things probably, or SAML, that you need to then start to, just as an example, risk identifies. At some point, if you have too high of true positives, you're effectively just modeling exact code. Yeah, I would agree with that. And not to change the subject entirely, but Kyle, one thing like I know about your career is you've really, it's self-made, right? You've grinded away to get to where you're at now, to work in an environment that you like. And I think that that's something that should be said, is that, you're the case in point of having worked at many different places. Some of those places were just a stepping stone to like, a better sort of engineering environment that you want to work on or work in. But my point is that you've really like pushed your career forward yourself. You really are a self-made person. And having said all that, Seth and I and you're pretty far removed from being like early days, but the difference is you actually hire, you've been a hiring manager pretty recently. And so why I'm saying all this is that people come to Seth and I and they're like, hey, how do I get started? How do I build my career? All that, right? And our input's a bit dated, right? And we're not like, we're not hiring managers every day, right? I mean, and the hiring I do is usually for software engineers at this point. So having prefaced all of that, like I'm curious, guidance that you might have for people, or sort of input that you have there, things that you're looking for. Is it certs? Is it this? Is it that? What are you looking for?
Yeah, so if you're starting out, I mean, certs are good. Certs aren't bad. But especially, I mean, if you've followed along the history in the past, few decades or whatever of kind of security certifications and what's been going on and what's happened over the time, like certs can be good for some time and then fall out of favor later. So you want to make sure that you take your time to probably do your research to make sure that the cert that you're looking for is going to, at the end of the day, provide you with actual information that's going to be useful to you, rather than just worrying about a cert for a piece of paper, in my opinion, at least. So the way I would look at it is, if you're looking for a cert, like make it something that you actually care about, something that you're going to get actual value from, something that's going to really give you some benefit, some part of some training or something that you're going to learn and get something new. Outside of that, a lot of the people that I've talked to, and one of the big things, at least for me as a hiring manager when I'm hiring, one of the biggest things that I look into is, and sometimes this can be hard to tell, but you can, with anxiety and nerves during an interview, but you can try and look past that and try and get an understanding of just if somebody is truly interested in what they're talking about, and in security, and is passionate about what's going on. Because in my experience, 9 times out of 10, even if you don't know everything you need to know at the moment, if you're somebody who actually cares about it and you're passionate about it, and it's not just a job necessarily to you, then you're gonna excel. You're going to learn more. You're going to try and push yourself, and trying to learn more. And that passion is going to help you along your career in security if it's something that you're actually interested in. The biggest issue that I see with a lot of people, and I don't think anybody who's watching this podcast falls into that category, but a lot of people that I've talked to, are people who are interested in getting to security or in cybersecurity or IT, it's just like they talk about how, well, yeah, I mean, it sounds like great money, and it sounds like it's a fun job or whatever. And it's like, okay, yeah, but are you actually interested in what you're doing? Is this something that you really care about? If it's just a paycheck for you and you're not going to do additional research or try and be a part of the community, you can kind of, you can coast, you can stay in a position and be there. But if you really want to excel in security and you want to push yourself, it requires professional development, spending some time outside of work doing research, keeping up with trends, going to cons, and being a part of the community. So.
And to follow up on that too, another follow-up question. Sorry, Seth, I know I'm like, but I do have a follow-up question, because one thing that people come to us and say is like, or complain about, is that there will be a job posting where it's like, you got a PhD in computer science and 12 years of experience, and by the way, this is like a junior analyst position kind of deal. So do you come across that, and is that like in stone, forever written, that you have to meet those obligations, or in your experience is that not the case and people should just say screw it and apply? Or
In my experience, when I'm looking at job recommendations and things of that nature, and what I know of being a hiring manager internally and some of those requirements, there are certain requirements that are necessary. When you're talking about internally, like HR is going to say that, based off of this pay range, based off of this title, this individual has to have this amount of years of experience. And that is non-negotiable. And there are certain circumstances where that will happen. So there are certain things that you do want to keep track of in that posting, where you say like how many years of experience, general background, if you have working experience in security or whatever the case is. But if it doesn't, or if those match up, the rest of those requirements or recommendations, usually it's only about 50% of those that are actually like valid, that really matter. You're kind of looking, in my experience, you're looking for, this is your wish list, right? You'd love to have somebody with all of these things, but realistically you're looking for somebody with about half of those bullet points, and somebody who you feel confident has the drive and the self-motivation to continue to their growth, to pick up the rest of the bullet points that you're looking for. So.
Well, and I mean, to that point, right? Like I'm thinking back to a discussion that I had with someone, late last year, right? Who, they're done with college, they're looking for a job, they want to do it starts with it looks like, securities are great. Like I saw it recommended as a good career path. And I was like, yeah, that's awesome. Well, can I come work for you? And my first question was, okay, like, you code? And they're like, well, no, I never took a Python class or anything like that. And I'm like, I don't know what you want me to do with this, right? Like,
Yep.
You haven't done the basic research of what it takes to be in the industry. And if you've never even like picked up a line of Python, you're not going to be successful. And that was kind of my response was, dude, I can tell you how to get to this point, but if your career and your interests haven't aligned up to the place that you're at in your life, I don't know if it's ever going to be that, right? And as a small business, right, like me running my own little my own little consulting company, like I can't afford to pay someone that doesn't have experience, right? Like that's just, or at least a drive.
Right.
And like, I don't want it to be a knock on this person, right? But on the flip side, yeah, that's the sort of thing that frustrates me. So like, I would say if I was talking to someone that already was in the industry or was trying to get there, that had half of those qualifications or at least met them, right? Go for it, right? Like it's probably not going to hurt as long as you can get past that HR filter to get at least a discussion with someone. Because most of us want others to jump into it, right? Most like we know that there's a lack of good people in the space, and we need more good people across multiple organizations. Uh, and there are jobs that are out there, but it's going to take some personal growth and it's going to take some personal dedication to get to the point that you can fill one of those roles.
Yep, I
Yeah,
agree. And Robert had a good question about
yeah, it does. Yeah,
how to get
Oh,
past
go ahead.
how to get past the ATS. In my experience, I mean, it's volume. Like to be honest, like you definitely want to like make sure you've got a good resume, make sure it's good and cover letter. But the truth of the matter is, and speaking myself, even as a hiring manager, I know, as much as you try your best, I know like I had hundreds of applications when a job posting went up. Filtering in from LinkedIn or different sources. It's hard to sort through it all. It is. So like you do rely a little bit on some of those basic screening, some of those basic automated screening just for like keyword searches and getting a decent understanding. Um, but I mean, the truth of the matter is that eventually your resume will get seen by a real human. And if you've got a good resume, a good cover letter, and you keep trying, especially networking on LinkedIn, like reaching out to recruiters separately, especially organizations that you're really interested in working with or things of that nature, could help. Or being active and making posts related to security or related to the sector that you're trying to get into specifically might also help, and just get your name out there. I would say, if I'm honest, most of my most successful roles, and including where I'm at right now, have been from recruiters reaching out to me. It wasn't even an application situation necessarily.
yeah. Well, and I mean, that's the difficult thing is getting into that cycle, right? Like of, hey, you're in the space, you're doing something, turning it into a passion project. And, I think all of us recognize that like having to do that outside of our regular 9 to 5 has been a portion of what we do on a daily basis. That being said, if you're trying to get past that initial round of filters, um, community, what you went back to, like being involved, like it comes down to connections and who because that will get you
Yeah.
past that first filter that is on LinkedIn or whatever it is. And if you already know somebody that works there because you went to a conference, you went to their talk, you said hello, you sat down with them, you went over beers, whatever it is, that is the way to actually jump into it. I mean, I know that's how I first got into fishnet. It was people that I knew, right? Like that's how I first got into different organizations because they were working there and they were willing to give you a chance because of the connections that you have. Um, I know it's super discouraging. You see some of those like data analytics that people do on, oh, I sent out 1,000 resumes and I only got like 10 callbacks and then 4 interviews and I eventually got a job. But then I start to wonder, like, okay, you sent out 1,000 resumes. You applied to 1,000 jobs. Like, how many of those did you actually do the research on and build a cover letter and go talk to people about? Right? Like, all you're doing is a LinkedIn post for a generic job description. Yeah, most of those are going to get filtered out very quickly because you can tell as a hiring manager that this is not something that people are taking seriously, or it's just a shot in the dark.
No,
Oh, plus if the submission
100%
system,
agree.
yeah.
Go ahead, Ken. Sorry.
I was just gonna no, no, no. I was just gonna add like I'm just saying in those cases, like companies do usually have a spot to like tell us why you want to work here, or some area where you have room for that. So I agree. If you're submitting, the likelihood that you're honestly saying why you really think this organization is the correct one for you to work on when you're submitted to 1,000 different organizations. It's very, very low likelihood that
I will tell you,
you're
from
doing a
my
very like
experience.
good
Oh,
job
sorry, go
there.
ahead.
Yeah.
No. Sorry. Yeah.
I'm getting a little bit of a time delay, I think. My apologies, Ken. I thought you were I thought you were paused there. But no, I would say that from my experience with that, exactly that. I would say that you focusing on the network is definitely important if you have that capability. If you were able to do that, if you were near a place or have the ability to attend those events or whatever, that is probably your best path forward, is focusing on your network of individuals, your community, and trying to leverage them. If you can't do that, then yeah, mass sending resumes to organizations that you actually care about. But here's what I will say, as a hiring manager too. All of those, if there is or as a previous hiring manager, if there are those components that are inside of the application process, if there is something there that states, like Ken said, like upload a CV, or do you have a specific, like anything else you'd like to tell us or anything like that, those forum fields, at least me personally, and I know quite a few other hiring managers, we do look at those when you're doing that. So they actually are a really good starting place when you're looking through a bunch of resumes. If you've got 500 resumes, like Ken said, to be able to get a good understanding of who are the individuals that might actually be like interested in this and might have actually done their research, rather than just mass spamming at the first time they saw a potential job that somewhat matched their search.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I mean, it's customized, and I think you answered Robert's question there. Like, time, effort, and network is more important than mass submissions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And I'd also go back to some of the things like bug bounties as well, right? Like, instead of putting putting all of your time into a certification, it may make sense to actually start trying to do similar style work through a bug bounty, through some of these other avenues that give you experience in that space. And hey, right, like, it could actually pay you some money at the same time, but use it as a learning opportunity to learn how to break down an application, how to perform manual testing, to get better at it and hone your skills, because that's what's going to lead to, again, networking, more communities, more experience that a hiring manager would be looking for.
Yep. No, completely agree.
Yeah. Cool. Let's see. Yeah, we're getting towards the end of time, so I want to make sure that we're not covering, like, and it goes by so quickly. This is what always happens to Ken and I.
That's a good point. Like, we should probably say to Kyle, hey, since we're running lower on time, like, are there things that you wanted to get out there and talk about specifically, whether that's around like what it's like to sort of deal with software security in today's current state, or I don't know, like any projects you're working on, just anything you want to talk about. We want to make sure. Yeah, I'm glad you said that, Seth. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure we give you time to
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Yeah, no, I'm good. I mean, I've been, so obviously I've been doing a lot of things here that some internal things that I can't necessarily give specifics of everything that we're working on, but quite a few interesting improvements. One of the good things is, like I said, it's really nice to be able to not have to focus on tech debt or a bunch of output from a vulnerability scanner all that much, and most of those are clean. I get to dive through code and solve real issues, or do internal pen tests or peer review of features that are coming out. We're releasing some new features right now that have some interesting security implications that I've been diving into pretty extensively. Yeah, I mean, like, as I'm sure most every other organization or most SaaS-based companies have some sort of like impersonation feature or something of that nature. So I've been looking at ways to improve, like, for our implementation of that. We've been working on our version of that, and I've been working with our team, our engineers, and my manager to make sure that we're presenting a secure implementation of this feature, because it's always potentially risky when you're adding something like that. Also, just looking through and identifying some interesting Ruby issues that recently that were actually released that went through and started
Ruby
modifying some
doesn't
of the
have issues.
core functions.
Ruby doesn't have issues. That's false.
Yeah. No, I mean, what's really fun is just, I've been solving a lot of really complex and interesting problems, which is fun. And if I could take a second just to rep Tines a little bit and spout that off, and not just as an employee, but as an engineer and as somebody who's been in security and engineering and IT for a very long time, having a tool that allows me to automate as efficiently and quickly as Tines can. Like it used to be, I had a really good for an idea for an automation, and then I'd go write up the infrastructure, get a Lambda, write up some API, get everything ready for it. Nowadays, if there's a halfway decent API and I know the information I want, I just I load up Tines and I get to automating, and I can tell you from my experience as an engineer, it has been super helpful for that, or just being able to automate simple investigations, simple checks. We've got AI checks in there that you can do a little bit of reflective analysis before it even gets to you, so you can get some enriched data and information on a log, or getting some additional information on a PR even, and doing some analysis on whether or not developers are using dependencies with licenses that you might not necessarily want to use in your application, and things like that. There's a lot of different ways to use it and ways that you can automate some interesting stuff.
This is funny because we've talked about Tines more than once, but obviously like we're not, we don't have any like sponsorship or anything like that with Tines. But I heard about Tines because of Jimmy Mesta, which actually, yeah. Hey, by the way, sorry, I forgot
Congrats
about that.
to
Hey,
Jimmy.
congrats
Yeah.
to Jimmy. Yeah. Wait, what am I talking about? Yeah, I don't know if
security.
anyone. Yeah, I don't know if you saw Kyle. They used to be KSOC. Now they're Rad Security. They got their Series A, and I know that we've had Jimmy on the podcast a couple times now. And Jimmy, like, I remember he was working on it out of his. I'll keep this brief. He was working out of his van, basically, like living the camping lifestyle with his wife, and they were having a newborn and trying to build a company. And so it's cool to see like years later him hit Series A. But anyways, I heard about Tines from Rad Security. They're like, this product's awesome. And then I heard about it from other people. I think I heard about it from Jimmy, like maybe RSA 2023. And then I'm pretty sure it was RSA 2023. And then like fast forward now, you're actually there, which is just kind of a funny coincidence. But I love the product because I think it's just very easy to set like webhooks and drag and drop. Like I was actually playing with it the other day because I was curious about how easy or not easy it would be to take a webhook event, like an issue or a PR comment from GitHub, and just route that directly off to an LLM. Just because I was playing with Tines, I just wanted to play with it. I was just curious. Anyways, I just think it's really a cool product and fun. I know
Super easy to do that, actually. Yeah, there's some really interesting use cases. There's so we just started our YD YDWWT. You did what with Tines? It's a whole thing that we do these campaigns every once in a while, and it's you did what with Tines, and the idea is that you submit Tines stories that you build. Maybe they're security focused or related to SOAR. Maybe they're not. Maybe they're just crazy automations. And we get some really, really interesting submissions, and they're really creative and really fun. And it's gotten powerful to the point to where you can actually you can create an entire application or API in Tines realistically using incoming webhooks and HTTP requests and the inbuilt pages and Tines and things of that nature. You can build out an entire application and API and really complex automations with the application. So.
Oh
Yeah, there's a lot. I was telling you, or we were talking about it before the podcast, but I've been recommending it to a couple of people that, they can do like some coding and shell scripting and other things, but are looking for tools to speed that up, because I know the analysis that they're looking at is more kind of security engineer analysis of log parsing and other things that at times, they aren't trained developers, and so they run into the limitations very quickly. And Tines is almost tailor built to that sort of a mentality, right? So I'm interested.
Or even
to see
if you're a really good,
Yeah.
Sorry, even if you have a lot of technical experience,
Yeah.
just I mean, from my experience, like to your point, it makes it like I could write up lambdas and do all of this automation myself and write it out, or I can just create a time story. It'll take me like 10 minutes where I would have written out this other automation and it would have taken me a couple hours. So
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yep. It's a great tool. So if you don't have experience with it, go play with it. Could be useful to you, right? Like that's the only reason we're talking about it is we see it as something that you could add to your arsenal for application security purposes, right? Whether or not you are technical, right? Which is what the great thing about it.
yeah.
Well, good. We have been talking for an hour. I do want to be cognizant of your time. Kyle, thank you so much for coming on today. There's been a lot of good recommendations.
Tried to convince him to come on for years, but
Yeah,
I
we're
think
excited
he
to
wanted
finally
wait
get to
till
this
the
point.
moment was right. Yeah.
I appreciate it. Yeah.
Yep.
I'm a little shy sometimes.
That's okay. Like, there's a lot of people in the space that are, right? Like, and we understand why that can be. Anything else you want to bring up? If people want to reach out or talk to you, where can they find you?
Yeah, I mean, LinkedIn is probably a good place. You could also hit me up on Discord. If you got Discord, I can go ahead and post that in the comments here. But yeah, it's just Karosec. Let me go ahead and post that in there. Join the chat. Oh, I'd have to connect that up, but it's KEROSECK. Or just you can find me on LinkedIn. But yeah.
Cool. Okay. Well, yeah, we'll let people reach out if they have more questions. I think you are also in Slack with us in Absolute AppSec.
I am in the Absolute AppSec Slack. I've been there for quite a few years. Yeah.
Yeah. We all forget we had to reset some. I think it was a couple of attendees for the last course, right, Ken? Their Slack because they had joined like 5-6 years ago, which is crazy to me that we've been running it for that long. But whatever.
Yeah.
So reach out in Slack. We'll keep the conversation going there. But again, very appreciative for you coming on, taking the hour with us. We'll continue the conversation as it makes sense. And otherwise, Ken, any last minute thoughts before we wrap up today?
No, just a reminder about that training course that we're giving next month, end of next month, secure code review virtually, training.absoluteappsec.com. That's it.
Yep. That's it. And we will see everyone next week. Thanks for listening.